Chapter 1, The Great Escape. The Hermes stiletto made a satisfying crack against Marcus's skull as Aria Kim brought it down with the force of 3 years of suppressed rage. Aria. Her adoptive sister Chloe scrambled to cover herself with the designer wedding sheets, the same ones Aria had picked out for her honeymoon suite. It's not what it looks like. Really? Aria's voice was deadly calm as she surveyed the scene before her. Her fiancé of 3 years, naked and tangled with her maid of honor. Her own sister. Because it looks like you're screwing my husband-to-be 4 hours before our wedding. Marcus sat up, his perfect politician's smile still intact despite the blood trickling from his temple. Sweetheart, let's discuss this rationally. We can work through this. Aria laughed, the sound sharp as breaking crystal. Work through this? Marcus, you're literally still inside my sister. She'd come to the bridal suite to retrieve her grandmother's pearl necklace, the only thing of value her real parents had left her. Instead, she'd found her entire future crumbling in a tangle of Egyptian cotton and betrayal. The wedding is in 4 hours, Marcus said, as if that explained everything. 300 guests. The merger depends on this union. Your father's company is not my problem anymore. Aria turned on her heel, her $20,000 Vera Wang gown rustling like angry leaves. Behind her, she could hear Chloe's sobs and Marcus's frantic whispers, but their voices faded as she stalked toward the hotel's service elevator. The Mandarin Oriental's top floor was chaos. Wedding planners rushed past with armfuls of white roses, the caterers were setting up the reception, and somewhere in the distance, a string quartet was practicing Pachelbel's canon. Her wedding march. The soundtrack to what should have been the happiest day of her life. Instead, it felt like a funeral dirge. Miss Kim. Her wedding planner, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, intercepted her near the elevator. There you are. We need to start your hair and makeup in 20 minutes, and the photographer wants to cancel it. I'm sorry. Cancel the wedding. All of it. Send everyone home. Patricia's face went white. Miss Kim, I don't understand. The ceremony is off. Aria stepped into the elevator, but Patricia's hand shot out to stop the doors from closing. You can't be serious. The media alone will. Will what? Crucify me? Let them. Aria's finger hovered over the button for the parking garage. I'd rather be destroyed by strangers than married to one. The elevator doors slid shut on Patricia's horrified expression. Aria's hands shook as she pulled out her phone. 27 missed calls from her adoptive father, Richard Kim. She deleted them all without listening. Whatever consequences waited for her, they couldn't be worse than a lifetime chained to Marcus Pemberton and his wandering hands. The parking garage was blissfully empty except for her midnight blue Aston Martin, a gift from Richard for her Harvard Law graduation. She'd never driven it. Never been allowed to. Too dangerous, he'd said. Too independent. Today, she didn't care about danger. She hiked up her skirt and slid behind the wheel, the engine purring to life with a growl that matched her mood. The wedding dress was a nightmare of tulle and beading, but she managed to stuff most of it into the passenger seat. The diamond tiara, Marcus's engagement gift, caught the garage's fluorescent lights as she adjusted the rearview mirror. She looked like a deranged fairy tale princess. Perfect. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Aria, please. Think about what you're doing. Your family needs this marriage. Vincent Shaw is circling. Without Pemberton Industries backing us, Kim Holdings will collapse within 6 months. Vincent Shaw. The name made her stomach clench. Richard's business partner had always made her skin crawl with his cold smiles and calculating stares. She'd suspected for months that he was maneuvering to take over Kim Holdings, but Richard had dismissed her concerns. After all, what did she know about business? She was just the adopted daughter, the pretty face meant to seal deals through marriage. Another text from Marcus. Vincent's already making moves. He's been buying up our debt. This wedding is the only thing standing between your family and ruin. Aria stared at the message, her finger hovering over the reply button. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was she being selfish? Destroying her family's legacy for the sake of her wounded pride? Then she remembered the sound of Marcus's laugh as Chloe whispered something in his ear. The way his hands had roamed her sister's body with practiced familiarity. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a pattern, a preview of her future. She deleted the message and threw the phone into her purse. The Aston Martin's tires squealed as she peeled out of the garage and into the Seattle afternoon. Rain misted the windshield, because of course it was raining on the day her life imploded. She drove without direction, letting muscle memory guide her through the familiar streets of her childhood. Past the private school where she'd never quite fit in. Past the country club where she'd learned to play tennis and make small talk with the wives of Richard's business associates. Past the cemetery where her real parents were buried, their graves marked with modest headstones Richard had paid for out of guilt and obligation. She was 26 years old, and she'd never made a single decision for herself. Every choice had been filtered through Richard's expectations, Marcus's political ambitions, or society's demands. Her career, her clothes, her friends, all carefully curated to fit the image of the perfect adoptive daughter. Well, the perfect daughter was dead. Murdered in a hotel suite by a cheating fiancé and a backstabbing sister. The rain was coming down harder now, and the Aston Martin's wipers struggled to keep up. Aria should have pulled over, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. Motion felt like progress, even if she had no destination in mind. Her phone rang. Richard's number flashed on the dashboard display. Against her better judgment, she answered. Aria, thank God. Patricia told me what happened. Come home immediately. We can fix this. Fix this? Aria laughed bitterly. Dad, I caught my fiancé in bed with my sister. How exactly do you propose to fix that? Marcus made a mistake. Men do stupid things when they're nervous. The important thing is that your business deal fell through. That's what you're really upset about, isn't it? Not that your daughter was betrayed, but that your merger is dead. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the rain hammering against the car's roof. Aria, Richard said finally, his voice gentler. You're not thinking clearly. The shock has cleared my head for the first time in years. She took a sharp turn, the car hydroplaning slightly on the wet asphalt. I'm done, Dad. Done with the arrangements, done with being your pawn, done with. A black SUV appeared in her rearview mirror, close enough that she could see the driver's face. Another SUV pulled alongside her, forcing her toward the shoulder. Aria? What's wrong? I think someone's following me. The SUVs moved in perfect coordination, boxing her in. Professional. Practiced. Definitely not random road rage. Her heart hammered as she pressed the accelerator, but the Aston Martin's tires couldn't find purchase on the rain-slicked road. The SUV on her left bumped her gently, just enough to send her sliding toward the guardrail. Aria. She dropped the phone as she fought to control the skid. The car spun once, twice, before slamming into the metal barrier with a crash that left her ears ringing. Steam rose from the crumpled hood. Her head throbbed where it had hit the side window, and she could taste blood in her mouth. The diamond tiara had fallen into her lap, its sharp edges catching the light from the shattered windshield. Footsteps approached through the rain. Multiple sets, moving with military precision. The driver's door opened, and a hand reached in to unbuckle her seatbelt. Aria tried to fight, but her movements were sluggish, uncoordinated. Shock, probably. Or a concussion. Easy now, a familiar voice said. We're here to help. Vincent Shaw's face appeared in her peripheral vision, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the rain. His smile was the same one he'd worn at every board meeting, every family dinner, every occasion where he'd sat at Richard's right hand like a patient predator. Hello, Aria. I'm sorry about your wedding day. Such a shame when things don't go according to plan. She tried to speak, but her tongue felt thick and unresponsive. Something sharp pricked her neck, a needle, she realized with growing alarm. "Don't worry," Vincent said, his voice fading as darkness crept in from the edges of her vision. "I have much better plans for you." The last thing she saw before unconsciousness claimed her was Vincent's cold smile reflected in the broken glass of her windshield, and the realization that her escape had been nothing more than an elaborate trap. Chapter 2: The Auction Block. Cold air hit Aria's skin like a slap, jerking her back to consciousness. She tried to move, but her wrists were bound behind her back with silk rope, expensive silk, she noted with bitter irony. Even in kidnapping, these people had standards. The room was elegant in the way that only serious money could buy. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over marble floors and gilded walls. Classical music played softly in the background, as if this were a charity gala instead of whatever fresh hell she'd been dragged into. "She's awake." The voice belonged to a woman in her 50s, perfectly coiffed and wearing a Chanel suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. She approached with the detached professionalism of a surgeon, or a mortician. "Good. We're running behind schedule." The woman's fingers were cold as she tilted Aria's chin up. "Clean her up and get her dressed. The gentlemen are getting impatient." Aria's throat felt like sandpaper. "Where am I?" "Somewhere your screaming won't be heard." The woman's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "I'm Mrs. Chen. I run the hospitality here. You'll find cooperation makes everything much more pleasant." Two younger women appeared, dressed in black uniforms like expensive hotel staff. They moved with practiced efficiency, untying Aria's bonds and guiding her to a marble bathroom that belonged in a five-star spa. "Don't try anything foolish," Mrs. Chen warned. "The doors are locked, the windows are barred, and the men downstairs are very eager to begin. The sooner you cooperate, the sooner this unpleasantness will be over." Aria's legs shook as she stood. The crash, the drugs, her body felt like it had been run through a blender. But her mind was clearing, and with clarity came a cold, hard rage that burned away the fear. They wanted her compliant. Broken. Ready to be whatever sick fantasy they had planned. They were going to be disappointed. The staff worked in silence, washing away the blood and debris from the accident. Aria catalogued every detail, the bathroom's layout, the women's movements, the sound of voices drifting up from below. Male voices. Lots of them. When they produced the outfit, Aria's stomach turned. Black lace lingerie with cat ears and a tail. The kind of costume that turned women into objects, people into playthings. "No." Mrs. Chen raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry." "I said no. Find me a dress. A real one." "Miss Kim, you don't seem to understand your situation." "I understand perfectly." Aria's voice was steady, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm about to be sold to the highest bidder like a piece of meat. But I won't make it easy for you. I won't play your games or wear your costume or pretend this is anything other than what it is." Mrs. Chen's composure cracked slightly. "The clients have very specific expectations." "Then lower them." For a moment, the two women stared at each other. Then Mrs. Chen nodded to her staff. "Put it on her. Hold her down if necessary." The fight was brief and brutal. Aria managed to land one solid punch that sent the younger attendant stumbling backward, but she was outnumbered and weakened. Within minutes, she was dressed in the humiliating outfit, her wrists bound again with rope that matched the black lace. "There," Mrs. Chen said, smoothing her hair back into place. "Much better. The gentlemen do love a bit of spirit in their acquisitions." They led her through corridors lined with priceless art, Picassos and Monets hanging like they were in a museum instead of a den of human trafficking. Everything about this place screamed old money and older sins. The main room took her breath away. It was an amphitheater of sorts, with tiered seating arranged around a central stage. Men in expensive suits filled the seats, champagne flutes in their hands and hunger in their eyes. The lighting was designed to showcase whatever poor soul stood on the platform while keeping the audience in relative shadow. Aria's knees nearly buckled when she recognized the faces. Senator Morrison, who'd given a speech about women's rights just last month. Tech mogul Bradley Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen, she hoped. Oil executive Thomas Hartwell, who'd been at her engagement party. And there, in the front row, Vincent Shaw raised his glass in a mocking toast. "Gentlemen," Mrs. Chen's voice carried over the murmur of conversation. "Tonight's special acquisition. Miss Aria Kim, recently liberated from an unfortunate engagement. Age 26, Harvard Law graduate, multilingual, and completely untrained." Laughter rippled through the audience. Aria felt bile rise in her throat, but she forced herself to stand straighter. If she was going to be their entertainment, she'd make sure they remembered it. "Bidding starts at $10 million. 15 million. The voice came from the third row. 20 million. Another voice, closer to the front. Aria found her voice. "Gentlemen, I have to say, this is flattering. Though I should warn you, I'm a terrible investment. I burn wedding dresses, assault fiancés with designer shoes, and I have a law degree. I'm basically a walking liability." Some of the men chuckled. Others looked annoyed. 25 million, someone called out. 30 million. That was Senator Morrison. Of course it was. "Senator," Aria said sweetly, "shouldn't you be in Washington pretending to care about your constituents instead of shopping for sex slaves?" The laughter died. Morrison's face turned red, but his hands stayed raised. 50 million. Vincent Shaw's voice cut through the tension. "And might I suggest we gag her? The mouth is part of the problem." "The mouth is the best part," Aria shot back. "Ask Marcus." "Oh wait, you can't. He's probably still trying to explain to his campaign manager why his fiancée torched her wedding dress and disappeared." The bidding continued, climbing higher with each call. Aria kept talking, hurling insults and uncomfortable truths at her potential buyers. Some of them laughed despite themselves. Others looked like they wanted to strangle her. Good. Let them see exactly what they were trying to buy. 200 million. The voice belonged to a tech executive whose company had just gone public. 300 million. Oil money, from the sound of the accent. 400 million. Vincent again, his eyes never leaving Aria's face. 500 million. Senator Morrison, his jaw clenched tight. The room fell silent. $500 million. For a human being. The number was so obscene it felt surreal. Aria's bravado was starting to crack. No amount of wit could change what was happening here. She was going to be sold, and there wasn't a damn thing she could do about it. $500 million, Mrs. Chen announced. Going once. $1 billion. The voice came from the shadows at the back of the room. Deep, controlled, with an accent Aria couldn't place. Every head turned toward the speaker, but the lighting made it impossible to see more than a silhouette. The silence stretched taut as a wire. $1 billion. The number hung in the air like a challenge. "I'm sorry," Mrs. Chen said, her professional composure finally cracking. "Did you say $1 billion? The figure stepped forward, just enough for the light to catch the edge of his face. Sharp cheekbones, dark hair, eyes like winter storms. Cash, transferred within the hour. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't just money anymore. This was a statement. A declaration of war. "Sir, that's a very generous offer, but perhaps we should verify. The money is already in your account." The man's voice carried absolute authority. "Check it." Mrs. Chen whispered something to an assistant, who scurried away with a tablet. The seconds ticked by like hours. Aria found herself staring at the mysterious bidder, trying to read his expression. There was something familiar about the line of his jaw, the way he held himself. The assistant returned, whispering urgently in Mrs. Chen's ear. Her face went pale. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "we have a winner. $1 billion to the gentleman in the back." The man stepped into the light, and Aria's world tilted sideways. Asian features, expensive suit, and eyes that seemed to see straight through her. He was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often were, sharp edges and hidden depths. He approached the stage with predatory grace, each step deliberate and measured. The other bidders parted before him like he was royalty or something more dangerous. When he reached the platform, he extended one hand toward her. His fingers were long, elegant, scarred across the knuckles. Miss Kim. Aria's vision blurred at the edges. The shock, the drugs, the sheer impossibility of what had just happened, it all crashed over her at once. Her knees buckled, and she felt herself falling toward the marble floor. But just before darkness claimed her again, she heard him speak. His voice was soft, meant for her ears alone, but the words hit her like a physical blow. I told you I'd find you. The last thing she saw was his face, and the terrible recognition that crashed through her like a wave. She knew those eyes. She'd seen them in her nightmares for 15 years. Damien Lee. The boy who'd disappeared from the foster home the same night her life had been torn apart. The boy she'd tried so hard to forget. The boy who'd promised he'd come back for her. Chapter 3, The Golden Cage. Aria woke to the sound of waves crashing against rocks and the scent of jasmine drifting through open windows. For a moment, she let herself believe she was somewhere safe. Then memory crashed back like a cold wave. The auction. The $1 billion bid. Damien Lee. She sat up slowly, her head pounding. The room was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Pacific Ocean, and the bed she'd been sleeping in was larger than her old apartment. Everything was white and gold and impossibly elegant, like a prison designed by angels. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. A young woman in a crisp uniform entered, carrying a silver tray. Good morning, Miss Kim. I'm Sarah, your personal attendant. Mr. Lee asked me to inform you that breakfast will be served in 30 minutes. Aria's throat was dry as dust. Where am I? Mr. Lee's estate in Malibu. There are clothes in the closet. He had them selected based on your measurements. The bathroom is through that door. Sarah's smile was professionally pleasant. He's waiting for you in the breakfast room. And if I don't want to have breakfast with him? Sarah's smile flickered. He said you might ask that. He also said to tell you that your adoptive father is in the hospital. Ice flooded Aria's veins. What? A heart attack, apparently. Brought on by stress. He's stable, but... Sarah shrugged delicately. Mr. Lee has the best doctors on standby. Your cooperation would ensure they remain available. The message was clear. Behave, or Richard dies. Aria wanted to scream, to rage, to tear the beautiful room apart piece by piece. Instead, she nodded. 30 minutes. When Sarah left, Aria explored her gilded cage. The closet was filled with designer clothes in her exact size, silk blouses, cashmere sweaters, tailored pants. All in colors that would complement her skin tone. All devastatingly expensive. All proof that this hadn't been a spur-of-the-moment decision. The bathroom was a marble paradise with a tub the size of a small pool. Aria stared at it for a long moment, then turned on every faucet, every shower head, every water feature she could find. Within minutes, water was cascading over the edges, flooding the pristine marble floor. Let him deal with that. She selected the most conservative outfit she could find, black pants and a cream silk blouse, and made her way downstairs. The mansion was a maze of corridors lined with priceless art and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the ocean view. It was beautiful in the way that money could buy, but it felt cold. Empty. Like a museum instead of a home. The breakfast room was another showcase of elegant restraint. Damien sat at the head of a table that could have seated 20, reading what looked like financial reports while sipping coffee from bone china. He'd changed from his auction attire into dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that did unfair things to his shoulders. He looked up when she entered, those storm-gray eyes taking in her appearance with clinical assessment. Good morning, Aria. I trust you slept well. Like a baby. A kidnapped baby. She took the seat at the opposite end of the table, as far from him as possible. Nice place. Very successful psychopath chic. His mouth quirked slightly. I'm glad you approve. We need to discuss the terms of your stay here. Stay? Aria laughed, but there was no humor in it. Is that what we're calling it? You're not a prisoner, Aria. You're under my protection. Protection that cost you $1 billion. That's either very generous or very stupid. Damien set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. Neither. It's practical. Vincent Shaw wants you dead, and your adoptive family lacks the resources to keep you safe. I, however, do not. And what do you want in return for this protection? Your cooperation. Nothing more, nothing less. Aria studied his face, looking for the lie. But Damien's expression was unreadable, carved from stone and shadows. Cooperation in what, exactly? You'll live here under my supervision. You'll follow the security protocols my team establishes. You'll make no attempt to contact the outside world without my permission. His tone was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather. In return, you'll be safe, comfortable, and alive. And if I refuse? Then Vincent Shaw will have you killed within a week. Damien's voice didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Your choice. Aria reached for the orange juice, her hand trembling slightly. Some choice. More of a choice than you had at the auction. She couldn't argue with that. But she also couldn't bring herself to thank him. Not when she was still sitting in another cage, albeit a prettier one. A staff member appeared with breakfast, eggs Benedict, fresh fruit, pastries that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Her stomach growled despite everything. Eat, Damien said. You need to regain your strength. Why? Planning to auction me off again? Planning to keep you alive. He folded his newspaper with sharp precision. Vincent Shaw has put a $10 million bounty on your head. Half the criminals in the city will be looking for you. Aria's fork clattered against her plate. 10 million? What the hell did I supposedly do? You witnessed something. During your time with the Kim family, you saw or heard something that could destroy Shaw's operation. Damien's gaze was steady, unblinking. The question is, what? I don't know. I never paid attention to Richard's business dealings. I was too busy being the perfect adoptive daughter. Think harder. I am thinking. The words came out sharper than she intended. You think I wouldn't remember if I'd stumbled across evidence of human trafficking? You think I'd just forget something like that? Damien was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes we see things we don't recognize as important until later. Speaking of seeing things. Aria set down her fork and met his eyes. How long have you been watching me? I don't know what you mean. Don't lie to me, Damien. Or should I call you something else now? Mr. Lee? Your royal darkness? His eyebrows rose slightly. Your royal darkness? I thought it had a nice ring to it. I've been teaching your staff to use it. Sarah seemed particularly enthusiastic. For the first time since she'd seen him at the auction, Damien's composure cracked. He almost smiled. Almost. You flooded the bathroom. Did I? How clumsy of me. And short-circuited the home theater system. I was trying to find the news. Technology confuses me. The news is monitored. For your safety. Aria's temper flared. Everything's for my safety, isn't it? The locked doors, the surveillance, the complete isolation from the outside world. How convenient. You have no idea what. I have every idea. She stood so quickly her chair scraped against the marble floor. I know you bought me like a piece of property. I know you're keeping me here against my will. And I know you've been watching me long before that auction. Damien's face went very still. What makes you think that? Because you knew exactly what size clothes to buy. Because you knew how I take my coffee. Because you knew I'd try to flood the bathroom. Her voice was rising, but she couldn't stop it. How long, Damien? How long have you been stalking me? I wasn't stalking you. Then what would you call it? Keeping track of you. For how long? Silence stretched between them like a wire about to snap. How long? She demanded. 15 years. The words hit her like a physical blow. 15 years. Since they were children. Since the foster home. Since the night he'd disappeared and left her alone with monsters. You left me. The words came out as a whisper. You promised you'd come back, and you left me there with them. Aria. No. She backed away from the table, her chest tight, her breathing shallow. You don't get to explain. You don't get to justify. You left me there, and they. The room was spinning. Her chest felt like it was being crushed by an invisible weight. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't. Aria. Damien's voice seemed to come from very far away. Look at me. She tried to focus on his face, but black spots danced across her vision. Panic attack. She was having a panic attack, and she was trapped in this house with the boy who'd abandoned her 15 years ago. Strong hands guided her to a chair. Someone was counting, steady and calm. Breathe with me. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. She followed the rhythm, clinging to the sound of his voice like a lifeline. Gradually, the crushing weight lifted from her chest. The world stopped spinning. When she could breathe again, she found Damien kneeling beside her chair, his face etched with something that might have been concern. Better? She nodded, not trusting her voice. I'm going to get you some water. He stood, but she caught his wrist. Don't leave. The words surprised them both. But something in his expression, a flicker of the lost boy she'd once known, made her hold on. I won't leave, he said quietly. Not again. He brought her water and sat in the chair beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the ocean through the windows. I looked for you, she said finally. After you disappeared. I asked everyone, but no one would tell me what happened to you. I know. Where did you go? Somewhere I could become strong enough to keep my promises. Before she could ask what that meant, he stood abruptly. You should rest. We'll talk more later. He was halfway to the door when she called after him. Damien? He paused but didn't turn around. Thank you. For the breathing thing. His shoulders tensed. I learned it from a therapist. After I left the system. Then he was gone, leaving her alone with her questions and the sound of waves against the rocks. That afternoon, while the staff was busy with their duties, Aria explored the mansion. She was looking for escape routes, she told herself. Weaknesses in the security system. Anything that might help her get free. She definitely wasn't looking for clues about the man who'd bought her. The mansion was enormous, with rooms that seemed to serve no purpose other than to display wealth. A library with books that looked like they'd never been read. A music room with a piano that was perfectly tuned but dust-free. A gym that was clearly well used, the only space that felt truly lived in. On the 3rd floor, she found a door that was different from the others. Heavier. The kind of door that was meant to keep people out. Or keep secrets in. The lock was electronic, but it was an older model. Aria had picked up a few questionable skills during her law school years, including how to bypass basic security systems. A trick she'd learned from a client who'd been wrongfully imprisoned. The lock clicked open after 5 minutes of careful work. The room beyond was small and windowless, lit by a single overhead bulb. The walls were covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and detailed reports. All of them focused on one subject. Her. Aria stared at the display, her blood turning to ice. Photos of her at Harvard, at law school graduation, at charity events with Richard and Marcus. Pictures of her jogging in the park, having coffee with friends, leaving her apartment building. Some of the photos were clearly recent, taken with telephoto lenses from a distance. But others were older. Much older. A picture of her leaving the foster home at 18, clutching a garbage bag full of her possessions. Another from her first day of college, looking lost and overwhelmed on campus. Her high school graduation, where she'd sat alone in the audience because Richard had been too busy to attend. 15 years of surveillance. 15 years of watching her from the shadows. At the center of it all was a single photograph that made her knees weak. It was her as a child, maybe 11 years old, standing next to a boy with storm gray eyes and a protective arm around her shoulders. Written across the bottom in careful handwriting were 4 words that changed everything. My promise to you. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. I wondered when you'd find this room. Aria spun around to find Damien standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. But his eyes held 15 years of pain and guilt and something else she couldn't name. You've been watching me, she whispered. All this time, you've been watching me. Yes. Why? He stepped into the room, and she saw him as he really was, not the cold billionaire or the mysterious auction winner, but the damaged boy who'd promised to come back for her. Because I never stopped looking for a way to keep you safe. The admission hung between them like a live wire. Aria stared at the walls covered with her life, her history, her secrets, and realized that everything she thought she knew about her rescue was a lie. This hadn't been about the auction. This hadn't been about Vincent Shaw or her adoptive family's business troubles. This had been about a promise made by 2 broken children in a foster home 15 years ago. And now she was trapped in a house with the one person who knew all her secrets, including the ones she'd tried so hard to forget. Chapter 4, Unlikely Domesticity. You named the dog Kitty. Damien stood in the doorway of the sunroom, staring at Aria where she sat cross-legged on the floor. A golden retriever puppy was sprawled across her lap, tongue lolling out in blissful contentment. Yes. Aria scratched behind the dog's ears. Problem? It's a dog. Your powers of observation are truly remarkable. Damien pinched the bridge of his nose. Where did you get a dog? I found her by the gate. She was soaking wet and shivering. Aria's voice carried a warning edge. She stays. This is a secure facility. We can't have animals. She stays, Damien. Or I start breaking more expensive things. Your choice. The puppy chose that moment to lift her head and wag her tail at Damien, her expression pure canine optimism. Something in his face softened almost imperceptibly. Fine. But it needs shots, a collar, proper food. Her name is Kitty. The dog's name is Kitty. That's what I said. Damien looked like he was developing a headache. Why? Because it confuses people. I like confusing people. Aria grinned up at him. Especially uptight billionaires who think they can control everything. I don't think I can control everything. Just everything related to me. Their eyes met across the sunlit room, and for a moment, the air crackled with tension that had nothing to do with the dog. I'm trying to keep you alive, Damien said quietly. I know. Aria's voice was equally soft. Doesn't mean I have to make it easy for you. Over the following days, they fell into a strange rhythm of domestic warfare. Aria would adjust the thermostat to tropical levels, Damien would change it back to Arctic. She'd rearrange the furniture in the living room, he'd restore it to its original position while she slept. He'd organize her belongings according to some incomprehensible system, she'd scatter them again out of spite. It was petty and childish and somehow the most normal thing that had happened to her in weeks. You moved my books again, Aria said one morning, finding her small collection arranged by height rather than author. They were scattered across 3 different rooms. It was inefficient. They were where I wanted them. On the kitchen counter? I was reading the cookbook. Damien looked skeptical. You were reading Advanced Molecular Gastronomy. I was considering making dinner. But now I think I'll order pizza instead. Extra cheese, extra grease, extra everything you probably consider beneath your refined palate. I like pizza. Aria paused, a paperback romance novel halfway to its new hiding spot. You like pizza? Chicago deep dish. The greasier the better. But you eat like kale smoothies and artisanal bread. My nutritionist would prefer that, yes. Damien's mouth quirked slightly. But I grew up on food truck pizza and gas station hot dogs. Some habits are hard to break. It was the most personal thing he'd shared since her discovery of the surveillance room. Aria filed it away with the other small glimpses she'd caught of the boy beneath the billionaire armor. Their fragile détente shattered 3 days later when Eleanor Lee arrived without warning. Aria was in the garden with Kitty, teaching the puppy to fetch, when she heard the sharp staccato of heels on marble. She looked up to see a woman striding across the terrace with the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Eleanor Lee was beautiful in the way that money and excellent genes could create: elegant bone structure, perfect posture, and clothes that probably cost more than most people's cars. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe chignon, and her expression could have frozen fire. She stopped when she saw Aria, her gaze taking in the dirty jeans, the grass stains, and the golden retriever now chewing enthusiastically on a designer throw pillow. You must be the girl. Eleanor's voice carried the crisp authority of old money and older expectations. Aria got to her feet slowly, brushing dirt from her hands. I'm Aria Kim. You must be Damien's mother. I am Eleanor Lee. And you are a complication. Before Aria could respond, Damien appeared on the terrace. She'd never seen him look anything less than perfectly controlled, but now there was something almost tense about the way he held himself. Mother. I wasn't expecting you. Clearly. Eleanor's gaze flicked between them. We need to talk. Privately. Anything you need to say can be said in front of Aria. Can it? Because what I have to say concerns your engagement to Celeste Ju. The name hit Aria like a physical blow. Engagement. Of course. Men like Damien didn't stay single. They made strategic alliances with appropriate women from appropriate families. We'll discuss this inside, Damien said, his voice carefully neutral. Indeed we will. Eleanor turned to Aria with a smile that could have cut glass. Miss Kim, I'm sure you have things to attend to. Perhaps you could take your pet elsewhere. It was a dismissal so smoothly delivered it almost sounded polite. Almost. Aria looked at Damien, waiting for him to say something. Anything. But his face had gone blank, unreadable. Of course, she said finally. Come on, Kitty. Let's go find somewhere we're wanted. She walked away with as much dignity as she could muster, but she could feel Eleanor's calculating gaze on her back. And worse, she could feel Damien's silence like a knife between her shoulder blades. That night, the nightmares came. They always started the same way. She was 16 again, alone in the foster home with Mr. Henderson. His whiskey breath. His hands. Her desperate, futile attempts to fight him off. She woke screaming, sheets soaked with sweat, heart hammering against her ribs. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The room was too big, too luxurious. This wasn't her tiny apartment, wasn't her college dorm, wasn't. Aria. Damien was sitting in the chair beside her bed, fully dressed despite the late hour. His face was etched with concern, and there was something almost gentle in the way he said her name. You're safe, he said quietly. You're in my house. You're safe. She tried to speak, but her throat was raw from screaming. Instead, she pulled her knees to her chest and tried to stop shaking. Can I get you some water? She nodded, not trusting her voice. He disappeared for a moment and returned with a glass and a warm washcloth. Here. He held out the water, careful not to touch her without permission. Small sips. The water helped with her throat, but it couldn't wash away the lingering taste of terror. Damien held out the washcloth, and she pressed it to her face, grateful for the coolness against her fevered skin. Better? How did you know? She whispered. The security system monitors sound levels. When you screamed. He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. I have nightmares too. About what? Things I'd rather forget. They sat in silence for a while, two damaged people in the dark. Finally, Aria found the courage to ask the question that had been eating at her all day. Are you really engaged to someone named Celeste? Damien's jaw tightened. It's complicated. That's not an answer. My mother arranged the match years ago. It's expected. Expected. Aria laughed, but there was no humor in it. Like my engagement to Marcus was expected. How did that work out? This is different. How? Because I won't let anyone hurt her the way Marcus hurt you. The words hung between them like a bridge neither was ready to cross. Aria stared at his profile in the dim light, seeing something vulnerable in the set of his shoulders. What happens to me when you marry her? You'll be safe. I'll make sure of that. That's not what I asked. Damien was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know. The honesty of it cut deeper than any lie would have. Aria closed her eyes and tried to pretend her chest wasn't aching. Will you stay? She asked. Until I fall asleep? He nodded and settled back in the chair. I'll stay as long as you need. She curled up on her side, facing him, and let her eyes drift closed. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe enough to truly sleep. Damien stayed all night, watching over her like a guardian angel who'd forgotten how to fly. The next morning, Aria woke to find him gone, but she could still smell his cologne on the air. She dressed quickly and went looking for coffee, only to freeze when she heard voices from Damien's office. Temporary solution, Damien was saying, his voice carrying through the partially open door. Once Shaw is handled, everything will go back to normal. And the girl? The voice was crisp, professional. Someone from his business, probably. The girl is temporary. Once Shaw is handled, I'll marry Celeste as planned. Aria's heart stopped. Then it shattered. She pressed herself against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. He'd spent all night comforting her, had made her feel safe and protected, and this was what he really thought of her. Temporary. Disposable. Sir, if I may, the other voice continued, the situation is more complicated than we initially thought. Our intelligence suggests Shaw has connections throughout the foster care system. The Kim girl may have witnessed more than we realized. Which is why she stays under my protection until we can neutralize the threat. And after that? There was a long pause. When Damien spoke again, his voice was different. Strained. After that, she'll be free to live her own life. Will she, though? With respect, sir, you've been invested in her well-being for a very long time. Can you really just let her walk away? Another pause, longer this time. When Damien answered, Aria heard something in his voice that made her chest tighten, a hairline crack in his perfect control. I'll do whatever is necessary to keep her safe. Even if that means letting her go. Aria backed away from the door on silent feet, her heart breaking and mending and breaking again. Because beneath his words, beneath the careful control and businesslike planning, she'd heard something that changed everything. Damien Lee, the cold billionaire who'd bought her at auction, was falling apart at the thought of losing her. The question was, what was she going to do about it? Chapter 5, Ghosts and Revelations. Aria found Damien in his study that evening, staring out at the ocean with a whiskey in his hand. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of amber and blood, and for a moment she just watched him. In the golden light, he looked younger somehow. More like the boy she remembered. You've been avoiding me, she said from the doorway. He didn't turn around. I've been busy. With wedding plans? His shoulders tensed. Aria. Don't. She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. I heard your conversation this morning. About me being temporary. Damien finally faced her, and she saw the exhaustion etched in every line of his face. You weren't supposed to hear that. But I did. Just like I heard your voice crack when you said it. He turned back to the window. You're imagining things. Am I? Because the way I see it, you've been watching me for 15 years. That's a long time to maintain interest in something temporary. The surveillance began for business reasons. My father suspected the Kim family of embezzling from our joint ventures. I was tasked with gathering evidence. Aria moved closer, her reflection joining his in the glass. And did you find evidence? No. Richard Kim was many things, but he wasn't a thief. Damien's voice was carefully neutral. He was just desperate to save a company he'd built from nothing. So why did you keep watching? The question hung between them like a challenge. Damien took a long sip of his whiskey before answering. Because you fascinated me. You were surrounded by corruption, by people who saw you as nothing more than a tool to be used, and yet you never broke. You kept your spirit, your fire. I'd never seen anything like it. The admission hit her harder than she'd expected. So you decided to collect me? Like a rare butterfly for your display case? No. He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. I decided to protect you. Even if you never knew I existed. But I did know you existed. I never forgot you, Damien. Even when I tried to. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor he wore so carefully. You should have forgotten. It would have been easier. Easier for who? Before he could answer, an explosion of glass shattered the peaceful evening. The study window exploded inward, sending them both diving for cover as bullets sprayed across the room. Damien tackled Aria to the floor, covering her body with his as more shots peppered the walls. She could feel his heart hammering against her back, could smell his cologne mixed with the acrid scent of gunpowder. Stay down, he breathed against her ear. Through the chaos, Aria caught a glimpse of movement on the clifftop overlooking the house. A figure in black, rifle raised for another shot. Without thinking, she grabbed the heavy crystal paperweight from Damien's fallen desk and hurled it at the lamp. The room plunged into darkness just as the sniper fired again. The bullet that would have taken off Damien's head buried itself in the bookshelf instead. This way, Aria whispered, pulling him toward the door. They crawled across the floor as more shots rang out, each one precisely placed to flush them from cover. Professional. Military grade. Vincent Shaw wasn't playing games anymore. In the hallway, Damien's security team was already mobilizing. Orders were shouted, weapons drawn, the mansion transforming from elegant home to fortress in a matter of seconds. Sir, we need to get you to the safe room, the head of security said. Both of us, Damien corrected, his arms still protectively around Aria. Sir. Both of us, Marcus. 20 minutes later, they were sealed in a reinforced room deep in the mansion's basement. The walls were lined with monitors showing every angle of the property, and a small arsenal of weapons hung in glass cases like deadly artwork. Aria sat on the leather couch, Kitty curled protectively in her lap. The puppy had sensed the danger and stayed close, her usual playful energy replaced by alert watchfulness. He's escalating, Damien said, studying the security feeds. Shaw's getting desperate. How many more people are going to get hurt because of me? This isn't your fault. Isn't it? Aria's voice was raw. If I hadn't run from that wedding, if you hadn't run, you'd be dead by now. Marcus was never going to protect you from Shaw. How do you know that? Damien was quiet for a long moment. Because Marcus is on Shaw's payroll. He has been for months. The betrayal shouldn't have surprised her, but it still felt like a knife between her ribs. Her fiancé, her sister, her adoptive father's business partner, everyone she'd trusted had been working against her. There's something else you need to know, Damien said softly. About why Shaw wants you dead. Aria looked up from where she was stroking Kitty's fur. What do you mean? The assault. When you were 16. It wasn't random, was it? The room suddenly felt airless. Aria's hands stilled on the puppy's coat. How do you know about that? I've always known. I just didn't know the details. What details? Damien moved to sit beside her, careful to leave space between them. Tell me what happened. All of it. Aria closed her eyes, the memories she'd spent years burying clawing their way to the surface. Richard had been working with Shaw for about a year. Some kind of shipping deal, import, export. I didn't pay much attention until I started hearing raised voices from his office. What kind of voices? Arguments. Richard wanted out of whatever deal they'd made, but Shaw wouldn't let him go. Said Richard owed him money, favors, something. The night it happened. She took a shaky breath. Richard had told Shaw he was done. That he wouldn't be part of whatever Shaw was planning. And Shaw decided to send a message. Aria nodded, not trusting her voice. Even after all these years, the shame burned like acid in her throat. It was at a foster home, wasn't it? One of Shaw's properties. Henderson House. Shaw owned it through a shell company. He placed kids there who had useful information. Kids from families involved in his business. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Mr. Henderson was one of Shaw's men. What he did to me that night. Shaw ordered it. As punishment for Richard's defiance. Damien's hands clenched into fists. You can identify Shaw as your attacker. He didn't touch me himself. But he was there. He watched. The words tasted like poison. He said Richard needed to understand the consequences of crossing him. That this was what happened to people who tried to leave. And Richard? Fell in line like a good little soldier. Kept working with Shaw, kept his mouth shut about what had been done to his adoptive daughter. Bitterness colored her voice. After all, I was just a foster kid. Replaceable. The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of pain and secrets. Finally, Damien spoke. I'm going to kill him. The words were said with such quiet certainty that Aria actually believed him. Damien. He hurt you. He's still trying to hurt you. That ends now. You can't just. A sharp knock interrupted her protest. Marcus, the head of security, appeared on one of the monitors. Sir, your father is here. He says it's urgent. Damien's face went carefully blank. Send him down. Your father knows about the safe room? My father designed this house. He knows about everything. 5 minutes later, James Lee entered the secure room with the same commanding presence his son had inherited. He was older than Eleanor, with silver hair and eyes like winter storms. When his gaze fell on Aria, she saw calculation rather than warmth. Damien. Miss Kim. His voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. We need to talk. About what? About the fact that you've jeopardized a multi-million-dollar operation by playing knight in shining armor. Aria felt Damien tense beside her. What operation? James's smile was sharp as a blade. The one Vincent Shaw and I have been building for the past 3 years. Arms dealing, primarily. Some human trafficking on the side. He looked directly at Aria. Your little girlfriend here has become quite the liability. The room tilted sideways. Aria stared at James Lee, then at Damien, trying to process what she'd just heard. You're working with Shaw, she whispered. I was working with Shaw. Until my son decided to play hero and bought his childhood sweetheart for $1 billion. James's voice was conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. Now Shaw wants to end our partnership. Permanently. Dad. You have a choice, son. Marry Celeste within the month, turn the girl over to Shaw, and we salvage what we can of the business relationship. Or lose everything. The company, your inheritance, your future. James straightened his cufflinks with casual precision. I'll give you 24 hours to decide. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Damien? Shah's already mobilizing his people. If you don't hand her over willingly, he'll take her by force. And this time, he won't bother keeping her alive. The door sealed shut with a soft hiss, leaving them alone with the weight of impossible choices and the sound of Aria's world crashing down around her. Damien's father wasn't just working with her tormentor, he was demanding his own son sacrifice her to maintain their blood-soaked business empire. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the mansion's walls, Vincent Shaw was preparing to finish what he'd started 15 years ago. Chapter 6: The Gala from Hell. The ballroom of the Seattle Grand Hotel sparkled like a jeweler's display case. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across marble floors, and the city's elite mingled in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. The charity gala was the social event of the season, a gathering of the powerful and wealthy, all pretending to care about underprivileged children while sipping champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's rent. Aria stood at Damien's side, her midnight blue gown a perfect match for his tuxedo. To anyone watching, they looked like the ideal couple, beautiful, wealthy, untouchable. Inside, she felt like she was drowning. "Remember," Damien murmured, his hand warm on the small of her back, "you're my girlfriend. We've been dating for 6 months. Keep it simple. And if someone asks how we met? Through mutual friends. Nothing more complicated than that." Aria nodded, trying to ignore how his touch sent electricity racing through her system. 3 days had passed since his father's ultimatum, and Damien hadn't said a word about his decision. She was living in limbo, waiting for the axe to fall. "Damien, darling." A woman in emerald silk approached with the predatory grace of a social shark. "You look magnificent. And this must be the mysterious girlfriend we've all been hearing about. Mrs. Hastings, I'd like you to meet Aria Kim." "Aria, this is Margaret Hastings, president of the hospital board." Margaret's smile was razor-sharp as she looked Aria up and down. "Kim. That name sounds familiar. Weren't you supposed to marry that lovely Pemberton boy? Whatever happened to that?" Heat flooded Aria's cheeks. "It didn't work out. How unfortunate. Well, I'm sure you'll land on your feet. You seem very resourceful." The insult was delivered with surgical precision, wrapped in politeness but designed to cut deep. Aria felt Damien's hand tighten on her back. "If you'll excuse us," he said smoothly, "I see someone I need to speak with." They moved through the crowd, and Aria caught fragments of whispered conversations that made her skin crawl. "That's the girl who ran out on her wedding. Heard she was living in some kind of commune. Always knew there was something off about the Kim adoption." Each whisper felt like a small blade, death by 1,000 cuts. Aria lifted her chin higher and smiled like she owned the room. "You're doing well," Damien said quietly. "I've had practice pretending to be someone I'm not." Before he could respond, Eleanor Lee appeared like an elegant storm cloud. She wore silver that matched her hair, and her smile could have frozen champagne. "Damien. Miss Kim." Her tone made Aria's name sound like a communicable disease. "How lovely that you could join us tonight. Mother. I was just speaking with the juice. Celeste sends her regards." Eleanor's eyes glittered with malice. "She's flying in from Paris tomorrow. Something about finalizing wedding preparations." The words hit Aria like a physical blow. Wedding preparations. So Damien had made his choice. "We should discuss this later," Damien said, his voice tight. "Should we?" "Because Celeste is under the impression that her engagement is still very much intact." Eleanor turned to Aria with false sympathy. "I'm sure you understand, dear. These arrangements have been in place for years. Family obligations, you know." Aria's throat felt like sandpaper. "Of course. I knew you'd be reasonable. After all, you're hardly in a position to make demands." The cruelty was breathtaking in its casual delivery. Aria felt something crack inside her chest, but she kept her smile in place. "Eleanor," a new voice interrupted, "you look radiant as always." Aria turned to see a petite Asian woman in flowing white silk approaching. She was beautiful in an ethereal way, with delicate features and kind eyes. This had to be Celeste Ju. Celeste, darling. Eleanor's demeanor transformed completely. You're early. I thought you weren't arriving until tomorrow. I caught an earlier flight. I was too excited to wait. Celeste's gaze found Damien, and her face lit up. Hello, stranger. Celeste. Damien's voice was carefully neutral. You look beautiful. You always were a charmer. She laughed, the sound like silver bells. And you must be Aria. I've heard so much about you. Aria forced herself to shake the extended hand. Nothing too terrible, I hope. On the contrary. Damien speaks of you with such intensity. Celeste's eyes were shrewd despite their kindness. He's always been passionate about his causes. The word causes hit like a slap. Is that what she was to him? A charity case? If you'll excuse me, Aria said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her, I need some air. She walked away before anyone could respond, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown to disaster. Behind her, she could hear Eleanor's satisfied murmur and Celeste's gentle concern. The ballroom's terrace overlooked Elliott Bay, the water dark as ink under the night sky. Aria gripped the marble railing and tried to breathe. The evening air was cool against her overheated skin, but it did nothing to ease the burning in her chest. She'd been a fool to think Damien might choose her. Men like him didn't abandon family fortunes for damaged foster kids. They collected broken things, fixed what they could, and discarded the rest. Hiding already? The evening's barely begun. The voice made her blood turn to ice. She spun around to find Vincent Shaw standing in the terrace doorway, resplendent in a custom tuxedo that probably cost more than most cars. He looked like any other wealthy philanthropist, distinguished, successful, untouchable. Her hand started shaking. Stay away from me. Now, that's hardly polite. We're old friends, after all. Shaw stepped onto the terrace, closing the door behind him. You look beautiful tonight, Aria. Damien has excellent taste. I said stay away. Or what? You'll scream? Create a scene at Seattle's most prestigious charity event? His smile was predatory. I don't think so. You've caused enough embarrassment for one lifetime. Aria's chest tightened. The familiar panic was starting, the feeling of being trapped with no escape. Her breathing became shallow, rapid. There's that lovely response I remember, Shaw said, moving closer. Still the same frightened little girl, aren't you? I'm not, the words came out as a gasp. I'm not afraid of you. Liar. He was close enough now that she could smell his cologne, the same scent that haunted her nightmares. Shall I tell you what really happened tonight? Why young Damien brought you here? Through the glass doors, she could see the party continuing. Damien was speaking with a group of businessmen, Celeste at his side like she belonged there. He hadn't even noticed Aria was gone. It was a test, you see. To see if you could handle being part of this world. Shaw's voice was conversational, almost kind. You failed spectacularly, of course. Look at you, hyperventilating on the terrace like a common panic case. That's not true. Oh, but it is. Damien's made his choice, dear girl. He's choosing his family, his fortune, his future. Just like Richard chose his business over your well-being 15 years ago. The words hit like physical blows. Aria slumped against the railing, her vision starting to tunnel. But don't worry, Shaw continued, his hand reaching out to touch her face. I have such wonderful plans for our reunion. Don't touch her. Damien's voice cut through the night air like a blade. He stood in the doorway, his face a mask of cold fury. Shaw smiled and stepped back. Damien. I was just chatting with your charming companion. We were discussing old times. Aria, come here. Damien's voice was steel wrapped in silk. She tried to move, but her legs felt like water. The panic attack was in full swing now, her chest tight, her breathing ragged. She doesn't look well, Shaw observed. Perhaps she should go home. Rest. I'd be happy to ensure she gets there safely. Over my dead body. That can be arranged. The two men stared at each other across the terrace, and Aria realized she was watching something that went far deeper than her current situation. This was personal. Gentlemen. A jovial voice interrupted the standoff. There you are, Vincent. The auction's about to begin. A portly man in an expensive tuxedo appeared in the doorway, clearly oblivious to the tension. Damien, good to see you. And who's this lovely lady? Aria Kim, Shaw said smoothly. Richard Kim's daughter. You remember Richard, my business partner who died so tragically last month. The world tilted. What? Shaw's smile was triumphant. Oh, didn't Damien tell you? Your dear adoptive father had a second heart attack 2 weeks ago. Fatal, I'm afraid. Such a shame, we had so many projects in development. Aria's knees buckled. Richard was dead. The man who'd raised her, for all his flaws, was gone. And she'd heard about it from her tormentor at a party. You son of a bitch, Damien snarled, moving toward Shaw. Gentlemen, please. The portly man looked alarmed. This is a charity event. Shaw straightened his bow tie. Of course. My apologies. Grief makes us all emotional. He turned to Aria with mock sympathy. I'm so sorry for your loss, my dear. Richard was like a father to me too. With that, he walked back into the ballroom, leaving Aria shattered on the terrace. She stared after him, the full scope of her situation finally becoming clear. Richard was dead. Shaw was here, comfortable and confident, moving through Seattle's elite like he owned them. And Damien. Damien had brought her here knowing Shaw would be present. Had let her walk into this trap wearing a pretty dress and a fake smile. Aria. Did you know? Her voice was barely a whisper. Did you know he'd be here? Damien's silence was answer enough. Did you know about Richard? Aria, let me explain. She pushed past him into the ballroom, her vision tunneling with rage and betrayal. The glittering crowd seemed to part before her like she was diseased. She could hear the whispers starting again, see the pointed stares and raised phones. Behind her, Damien called her name, but she didn't stop. She had to get out of this place, away from these people, before she completely fell apart. The parking garage was dimly lit and nearly empty. Her heels echoed off concrete as she searched for Damien's car, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold her clutch purse. Running away again? Shaw's voice echoed through the garage. How predictable. She spun around to find him leaning against a concrete pillar, casual as if they were meeting for coffee. The auction was quite the production, wasn't it? He continued conversationally. All those wealthy men bidding on you like a prize heifer. But you should know, Damien's $1 billion bid was expected. What? Shaw's smile was pure malice. Did you really think it was coincidence? A random act of heroism? He laughed, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. My dear, naive girl. Damien Lee is James Lee's son. And James Lee has been my business partner for over a decade. The garage spun around her. That's impossible. Is it? Think about it, Aria. Who else knew about your location when you crashed? Who else had the resources to orchestrate such an elaborate rescue? Shaw stepped closer, and she could see the triumph in his eyes. The auction was theater. Every bid, every dramatic moment, all carefully choreographed to make you believe you were being saved. You're lying. Am I? Tell me, dear, in all these weeks with your white knight, has he once mentioned his family's business dealings? Has he explained why he really had you under surveillance for 15 years? Aria's chest constricted. He was protecting me. He was watching you. For me. James Lee has been feeding me information about your adoptive family's activities since the day Richard took you in. And when you became inconvenient, we decided to remove you from the equation permanently. No. The word came out as a sob. The crash was meant to kill you, but you survived. So we improvised. The auction would break your spirit, and then Damien would play savior, right up until the moment he handed you back to me. Shaw reached into his jacket and pulled out a smartphone. On the screen was a video call, and Aria's blood turned to ice when she recognized the face on the other end. Damien Lee sat in what looked like his study, his expression cold and businesslike. "Hello, Aria," Damien's voice came through the phone speaker. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but it's time you understood the truth." "Damien?" Her voice cracked on his name. "My father was right. You've become a liability we can't afford. Shaw has agreed to handle the situation quietly, and in return, Lee Industries will maintain our partnership." "You're lying." But even as she said it, she could see the truth in his expression. "This isn't real." "I'm afraid it is," Damien said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You were useful for a time, but that time has ended. I have a future to consider. A company to run. A wife to marry." The phone screen went dark, and Shaw slipped it back into his jacket with obvious satisfaction. "There we are," he said gently. "The truth at last. You were never rescued, my dear. You were simply transferred from one cage to another. And now." He smiled, and it was the same expression she remembered from her nightmares. "Now you come home with me." Chapter 7, The Breaking Point. The ride back to the mansion passed in suffocating silence. Aria stared out the window at the city lights blurring past, Shaw's words echoing in her mind like poison. "You were never rescued. You were simply transferred from one cage to another." Damien sat beside her, his jaw clenched, hands fisted on his thighs. She could feel the tension radiating from him, but she didn't care. Not anymore. The moment they walked through the front door, Aria headed straight for the stairs. "Aria, wait. Don't." She spun around to face him, her voice raw. "Don't you dare say another word to me." His face was pale, his dark eyes desperate. "Let me explain." "Explain what?" "How you've been playing me this entire time. How everything, every single moment between us, was a lie." "It wasn't a lie." "The video, Damien." Her voice cracked. "I saw you on Shaw's phone. You sat there in your precious study and told him I was a liability. That you were done with me." Damien's expression shifted, confusion replacing desperation. "What video?" "Aria, what are you talking about?" She laughed bitterly. "Still lying. Even now." She turned and ran up the stairs, her heels clicking against marble like gunshots. In the bedroom that had become her prison disguised as paradise, Aria yanked open drawers and pulled out the small suitcase she'd hidden in the closet. She'd been planning this moment for weeks, just in case. Just in case he decided she wasn't worth the trouble anymore. Well, that moment had arrived. She threw clothes into the bag with shaking hands, not caring what she grabbed. A silk blouse. Jeans. The comfortable sweater Damien had bought her after finding her shivering on the terrace one morning. She hesitated for a moment, then tossed it onto the bed. She didn't want anything from him. "What the hell are you doing?" Damien stood in the doorway, his bow tie undone, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. "What does it look like?" She didn't look up from her packing. "I'm leaving." "No." He stepped into the room. "You're not going anywhere. Watch me." She zipped the suitcase closed and turned to face him. "I'm done, Damien. Done being your possession. Done being your guilty conscience project. Done pretending that what we had was real." His face went white. "It was real. Everything between us was orchestrated by your father and Vincent Shaw." The words exploded out of her. You've been watching me for 15 years. 15 years, Damien. I was a child when you started spying on me. I was protecting you. You were gathering intelligence for Shaw. She picked up the suitcase, her hands trembling with rage. Did you laugh about it? When you watched me through your cameras, did you and your father have a good laugh about the pathetic foster kid who thought she was safe? Stop it. His voice was dangerous now, his control fracturing. You don't know what you're talking about. Then tell me. She dropped the suitcase and stepped closer to him, close enough to see the storm in his dark eyes. Tell me the truth for once in your miserable life. Tell me why you really bought me at that auction. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I knew Shaw would be there. The admission hit her like a physical blow. What? I knew he was one of the regular buyers. I knew he'd bid on you. Damien's hands clenched at his sides. I couldn't let him have you. So you knew. The betrayal was so complete it took her breath away. You knew I'd be walking into that room with him there, and you said nothing. I thought I could handle it. Handle it? Her voice rose to a near shriek. You thought you could handle me being paraded in front of my rapist wearing cat ears and a leash? I was going to outbid him no matter what it took. You put me in danger. She shoved him hard in the chest, and he stumbled back a step. You knew what he'd done to me, and you let me walk into that room defenseless. I was there. I was protecting you. By buying me like a piece of meat. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't care. God, I'm so stupid. I actually started to trust you. I started to think that maybe. She cut herself off and picked up her suitcase again. It doesn't matter what I thought. I'm leaving. She tried to push past him, but he caught her arm. Aria, please. Just listen to me. The door chime echoed through the house, followed by the sound of voices in the foyer. Damien frowned and released her arm. Mr. Lee? James's voice carried up the stairs. Mr. and Mrs. Kim are here to see Miss Aria. Aria's heart stopped. My parents? She ran to the window overlooking the front drive. Sure enough, her adoptive parents' modest sedan sat in the circular driveway, looking pathetically out of place next to Damien's collection of luxury cars. They found me, she whispered. How? Damien moved to stand beside her at the window. Shaw. The realization hit her like ice water. He told them where I was. They stared at each other for a moment, the implications sinking in. If Shaw had sent her parents here, it wasn't for a happy reunion. Downstairs, Patricia Kim was crying. Aria could hear her adoptive mother's distinctive sob echoing up from the foyer. She ran for the stairs, Damien close behind her. Her parents stood in the marble entryway looking small and frightened. Patricia's face was red and swollen from crying, while Robert Kim looked like he'd aged 10 years since she'd last seen him. Mom? Dad? Aria ran down the remaining steps and into Patricia's arms. What are you doing here? Oh, sweetheart. Patricia held her tight, and Aria could feel her trembling. We're so sorry. We're so sorry. Sorry for what? But even as she asked, Aria suspected she knew. Robert Kim looked at Damien with a mixture of fear and resignation. Mr. Lee. Thank you for taking care of our daughter. It was my pleasure, Damien replied carefully. Dad, what's going on? Aria pulled back from her mother's embrace. Why are you here? Robert's face crumpled. Vincent Shaw came to see us tonight. After Richard's funeral. He said if you didn't come home with us right now, he'd destroy what's left of the business. Take the house. Leave us with nothing. The business is already gone, Patricia added through her tears. Has been since Richard died. Shaw's been calling in debts, freezing accounts. We can't even afford groceries, sweetheart. Aria felt the world tilt around her. So you came to collect me? Like I'm some sort of payment? No. Robert stepped forward, his hands outstretched. We came to warn you. To get you away from here before Shaw. Before Shaw what? Damien's voice was deadly quiet. Patricia and Robert exchanged a look that made Aria's blood run cold. He's coming here, Patricia whispered. Tonight. He said if we couldn't convince you to come with us willingly, he'd take you by force. Over my dead body, Damien snarled. That's what he's counting on, Robert said quietly. He wants you out of the picture, Mr. Lee. He always has. And now that you've interfered with his plans. The sound of car engines roared up the driveway. Through the tall windows flanking the front door, Aria could see headlights, multiple sets of them. Shaw had arrived. Damien moved to the window and cursed under his breath. James, get Aria upstairs. Now. No. Aria stepped away from her parents and moved to stand beside Damien. I'm not running anymore. Aria. I said no. She looked at her adoptive parents, her heart breaking for them but her resolve hardening. I won't be traded around like property anymore. Not by Shaw, not by you, and not by him. She gestured at Damien. The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime incongruous with the dread filling the foyer. Damien looked at her, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. For a moment, she thought he might say something, might finally tell her the truth about everything. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and walked toward the door. Wait. The word tore from her throat before she could stop it. He turned back, hope flickering in his dark eyes. I need to know, she said, her voice barely steady. Before whatever happens next, I need to know if any of it was real. Any of it at all. Damien stared at her for a long moment, his carefully constructed walls finally cracking. When he spoke, his voice was raw with an emotion she'd never heard from him before. I fell in love with you the first time I saw your surveillance photo, he said quietly. You were 18, sitting in that coffee shop near your college, laughing at something your friend had said. You had this light in your eyes, this joy, despite everything you'd been through. I kept that photo on my desk for 3 years. Aria's breath caught in her throat. The $1 billion bid wasn't about ownership, he continued, stepping closer. It was the only way I could think of to save you from Shaw. The only way to get you away from him before his voice broke. Before he destroyed you completely. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. I love you, Damien said desperately. I know you don't believe me, I know I've given you no reason to trust me, but I love you more than my family's fortune, more than my father's approval, more than my own life. Aria stared at him, her heart shattering and healing simultaneously. In his eyes, she saw the truth she'd been desperate to find. Not the cold calculation of a captor, but the desperate love of a man who'd made terrible choices trying to protect what mattered most to him. But it was too late. The front door exploded inward, and Vincent Shaw walked into the foyer like he owned it, flanked by 4 men in dark suits. Good evening, everyone, Shaw said pleasantly, brushing imaginary dust from his tuxedo. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Chapter 8, The Chase. What followed was chaos. Shaw's men moved with military precision, spreading through the foyer while Damien stepped protectively in front of Aria. James appeared from nowhere with a gun drawn, but one of Shaw's thugs was faster. The butler crumpled to the floor, clutching his shoulder. Now, Shaw said, sking like a disapproving teacher. Let's keep this civilized. Get out of my house, Damien snarled. Your house? Shaw smiled coldly. Interesting choice of words, considering your father and I own it jointly through our development corporation. Aria's parents huddled together near the staircase, Patricia sobbing quietly into Robert's shoulder. Shaw barely glanced at them. Aria, darling, Shaw continued conversationally, it's time to go home. Your parents have been so worried. I'm not going anywhere with you. Oh, but you are. Shaw nodded to one of his men, who stepped forward. You see, your adoptive parents have agreed to sign over their remaining assets to me in exchange for your cooperation. Isn't that right, Robert? Robert Kim's face was gray with shame. We didn't have a choice. He said he'd kill you if we didn't. Shut up, Shaw snapped, his pleasant facade cracking. The adults are talking. Damien moved slightly, and immediately 3 guns were trained on him. Careful, Mr. Lee. I'd hate for things to get messy. You're not taking her, Damien said quietly. Actually, I am. And you're going to let me, because if you don't, I'll have your precious James here shot in the head instead of the shoulder. Shaw's smile returned. Then I'll kill her parents. Then I'll kill you. And then I'll take her anyway. Aria felt the world tilting around her. This was her fault. Everyone she cared about was in danger because of her. Fine, she said suddenly. I'll go with you. Aria, no, Damien started. But I have conditions, she continued, ignoring him. You let everyone else go. James gets medical attention. My parents go home safely. And Damien. She looked at him, memorizing his face. Damien lives. Shaw considered this, his head tilted like a curious bird. Interesting. You've developed feelings for your captor. How wonderfully predictable. Do we have a deal or not? We do. Shaw gestured toward the door. Shall we? Aria took a step forward, but Damien caught her wrist. Don't do this. I'll find another way. There is no other way. She pulled free of his grip, her heart breaking at the desperation in his eyes. This is my choice. Like hell it is. Damien lunged forward, but Shaw's men were ready. The butt of a gun connected with his temple, and he crumpled to the floor. Damien. Aria dropped to her knees beside him, her hands shaking as she checked for a pulse. Blood seeped from a gash on his forehead, but he was breathing. How touching, Shaw said dryly. But we really must be going. 2 men hauled Aria to her feet, and she didn't resist. As they dragged her toward the door, she heard Patricia Kim screaming her name. She didn't look back. The sedan smelled like leather and fear. Shaw sat beside her, completely relaxed, while his driver navigated the empty Seattle streets. Aria stared out the window, watching the city blur past. You know, Shaw said conversationally, I really did hope it wouldn't come to this. You were always such a bright girl. Resilient. I admired that about you. Is that what you call it? Oh, don't pout. It's unbecoming. Shaw adjusted his cufflinks. Besides, this arrangement won't last forever. Just until I can consolidate my business interests. A year, perhaps 2. And then what? You'll let me go? Shaw's laugh was soft and genuinely amused. My dear girl, you've seen too much, know too much. You were never going to be free. The words hit her like ice water, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd survived Shaw before. She could do it again. The car pulled into the circular drive of a massive estate outside the city. Aria had never seen the place before, but it screamed Shaw's taste, imposing, cold, designed to intimidate. Home sweet home, Shaw said as his men escorted her up the front steps. The interior was all marble and gold, like a museum dedicated to excess. Shaw led her through a maze of corridors to a wing that felt separate from the rest of the house. You're sweet, he said, opening a heavy wooden door. I think you'll find it comfortable. The room was beautiful and utterly prison-like. Thick carpet, expensive furniture, and bars on the windows disguised as decorative ironwork. The staff will bring you dinner shortly. I suggest you rest, tomorrow we begin discussing your future. Shaw paused in the doorway. Oh, and Aria? Don't bother trying to escape. The grounds are monitored, the staff is loyal, and I'd hate to have to hurt someone to make a point. The door closed with a soft click, followed by the sound of multiple locks engaging. Aria sank onto the bed and finally let herself cry. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Damien regained consciousness to find paramedics working on James and police questioning her parents. His head throbbed, but his mind was crystal clear. Shaw had taken Aria, and Damien was going to get her back. But first, he had to make a choice that would change everything. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he'd memorized but never called. Mitchell? It's Damien Lee. I need your help, and I'm willing to pay whatever it takes. He paused, watching the chaos in his foyer. I want to destroy Vincent Shaw completely. Every business, every asset, every dirty secret he's ever buried. Can you do it? The voice on the other end was crisp and professional. Mr. Lee, for the right price, I can make him disappear entirely. Good. And Mitchell? I'm cutting all ties with Lee Industries. Liquidate everything in my personal portfolio. I'm going to war. 3 days later, the first domino fell. Shaw's primary shipping company was raided by federal agents, who discovered enough evidence of human trafficking to trigger a massive investigation. The raids were simultaneous, coordinated, and devastating. Shaw's legitimate businesses crumbled next. Damien had spent those 3 days calling in every favor, leveraging every connection, and spending money like water. Shaw's partners abandoned him, his loans were called in, and his political allies distanced themselves. But it wasn't enough. Shaw still had Aria, and that was all that mattered. The call came on the 4th day. She's not eating, Shaw's voice was tight with frustration. She just sits in that room like a ghost. Let me talk to her. I don't think so. Damien closed his eyes, forcing himself to stay calm. Shaw, you're finished. Your empire is gone. The FBI is closing in. You have maybe 48 hours before they track you down. Silence on the other end. But I'll make you a deal, Damien continued. Let Aria go, and I'll give you a head start. 24 hours before I tell them where you are. You don't know where I am. Estate outside Bellevue, 17-acre property, registered under your shell company Maritime Holdings. Damien's voice was deadly calm. Should I continue? Another pause. What do you want? Her location. That's all. You disappear forever, and I'll make sure the authorities don't find you for 24 hours. And why would I trust you? Because I'm the only chance you have left. That night, Shaw's men bundled Aria into another car. She'd lost weight, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights, but when she saw Damien waiting in the abandoned warehouse Shaw had chosen for the exchange, something sparked back to life in her face. Let her go, Damien said, his hands visible and empty. Shaw nodded to his men, and they released Aria. She stumbled forward, and Damien caught her, pulling her against his chest. Are you hurt? He whispered against her hair. She shook her head, but he could feel her trembling. Touching, Shaw said. But this isn't over, Lee. You've cost me everything. I'll remember that. You do that, Damien replied without looking away from Aria. Shaw and his men disappeared into the night, but Damien barely noticed. Aria was safe in his arms, and that was all that mattered. Later, in the hospital where doctors checked her over despite her protests, Aria finally spoke. You destroyed your father's company, she said quietly. I chose you over everything else. He sat beside her hospital bed, careful not to crowd her. I broke my engagement to Celeste publicly. Cut ties with my father. Used every penny of my personal fortune to bring Shaw down. She studied his face with those dark eyes that had haunted his dreams. Why? Because I love you. Because none of that other stuff matters without you. Aria was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but distant. My birthday is in 1 month, she said. October 15th. Okay. You have until then to prove that what you're saying is real. That this isn't just guilt or obsession or some twisted savior complex. She met his eyes. If you can't convince me by then that your love is genuine, not just some need to fix broken things, I'll disappear. And this time, you won't find me. Damien felt his world tilt. Aria. 1 month, Damien. That's all you get. Chapter 9, Love Earned. The first week, Damien burned every meal he tried to cook. Aria watched from the kitchen island of his downtown penthouse, the only property he'd kept after liquidating everything else, as he cursed at smoking pans and overcooked pasta. She'd insisted on staying in the guest room, maintaining careful distance while he proved himself. "You know I can cook," she said on day 3, watching him scrape charred eggs into the garbage. "This isn't about practicality." He cracked fresh eggs into the pan with determined concentration. "You shouldn't have to take care of everyone else. Someone should take care of you." The simple statement hit deeper than any grand gesture could have. By the second week, Damien had mastered scrambled eggs and discovered Aria's weakness for perfectly brewed coffee. He learned she hummed while reading, that she preferred horror movies to romance, and that thunderstorms made her anxious, a leftover trauma response she tried to hide. During one particularly violent storm, he found her curled in the living room corner, hands pressed over her ears. "Can I sit with you?" he asked quietly. She nodded without looking up. He settled beside her, not touching, just present. When she eventually leaned against his shoulder, he felt like he'd won a war. "Tell me about your childhood," she whispered as rain lashed the windows. So he did. He told her about boarding schools where affection was currency and emotional manipulation was a survival skill. About learning that love was always conditional, always transactional. About watching his parents' marriage, a cold business arrangement that taught him relationships were about power, not partnership. "I didn't know how to love someone without trying to control them," he admitted. "You were the first person who made me want to try." The third week brought Eleanor Lee. Damien's mother arrived unannounced, her disapproval radiating like winter frost. She found Aria reading in the living room, casual in jeans and one of Damien's sweaters. "Miss Kim." Eleanor's voice could have frozen champagne. "How refreshing to see you've made yourself comfortable." Aria set down her book slowly. "Mrs. Lee. Damien's at the gym." "Perfect. That gives us time to talk privately." Eleanor settled into the opposite chair like a queen claiming her throne. "I have a proposition for you." She placed a check on the coffee table. $10 million, made out to Aria Kim. "Walk away," Eleanor said simply. "Disappear from my son's life, and this money is yours. Enough to start over anywhere, become anyone you want." Aria stared at the check, her expression unreadable. "You think everything has a price." "Everything does, dear. The question is whether you're honest enough to name yours." "And if I refuse?" Eleanor smiled, sharp as a blade. "Then you'll watch my son destroy himself completely. He's already lost everything because of his obsession with you. His inheritance, his position, his future, all gone. Is your damaged little romance worth watching him burn?" When Damien returned an hour later, he found Aria standing by the window, the check torn into pieces at her feet. "She came here," Aria said without turning around. His jaw tightened. "What did she offer you?" "Freedom. Money. A chance to save you from yourself." Aria finally looked at him. "She wasn't wrong about the damage loving me has cost you." "I don't care about the money." "I do." Her words stopped him cold. "Not because I want it, but because you gave it up. You sacrificed everything, and I need to know it wasn't just guilt. I need to know you don't regret it." Damien crossed the room slowly, stopping just outside her personal space. "Ask me in 10 years if I regret choosing you over everything else. Ask me when we're old and gray and I'm still making you terrible coffee every morning." Something shifted in her eyes, a wall finally cracking. October 15th dawned gray and drizzling, Seattle's typical autumn mood. Aria had been quiet all morning, the weight of decision pressing against the deadline they'd both been counting toward. Damien had planned something simple, dinner at the small Italian place where they'd had their first real date, the one where she'd laughed at his terrible jokes and he'd realized he was completely lost to her. They never made it to dinner. Shaw appeared in the parking garage like a ghost from their shared nightmares, flanked by 2 men Aria didn't recognize. But Shaw looked different, desperate, cornered, the polished veneer completely gone. Did you really think I'd just disappear? Shaw's voice echoed off concrete walls. You cost me everything, Lee. Both of you. This time, Aria didn't freeze. This time, she stepped forward instead of back. Good, she said clearly. You deserve to lose everything. Shaw's face twisted with rage. You little. Are we doing this the easy way or the hard way? Damien interrupted, his voice deadly calm. Shaw gestured to his men, but before they could move, Aria was already in motion. The self-defense classes Damien had quietly arranged, the training she'd insisted on during their month together, it all crystallized in one fluid movement. She grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall and triggered it directly into the first man's face. Damien lunged at the second man while Shaw stumbled backward, temporarily blinded by chemical foam. But Shaw recovered faster than expected, pulling a gun from his jacket. Nobody moves, Shaw panted, the weapon shaking in his grip. I should have killed you both from the beginning. But you didn't, Aria said, stepping beside Damien. And now you never will. The sound of approaching sirens filled the garage. Shaw's eyes widened as police cars screeched into view, surrounding them with practiced efficiency. You called them, Shaw breathed. I called them, Damien confirmed. The moment I saw you on the security cameras. Shaw raised his gun toward Aria, but it was over. Police officers swarmed him, weapons drawn, shouting commands. In seconds, Shaw was on the ground, finally finished. Later, sitting in Damien's penthouse as rain painted patterns on the windows, Aria found herself laughing. What's funny? Damien asked, settling beside her on the couch. I spent a month waiting for you to prove you loved me, she said. But I think I proved something too. What's that? That I'm not a victim anymore. That I can save myself. She turned to face him fully. And that I can save you too, when you need it. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a manila envelope. I have something for you. A birthday present. Inside were legal documents, papers transferring ownership of Shaw's seized assets. Warehouses, investment accounts, properties worth millions. All of it signed over to her. I don't want Shaw's money, she said immediately. It's not Shaw's anymore. It's yours. Complete financial independence. Damien's voice was quiet, serious. I'm not giving you this because I think you need saving. I'm giving it to you because you deserve the freedom to choose. Aria stared at the papers, understanding flooding through her. This wasn't about money. This was about power, the power to leave if she wanted, to stay because she wanted. The power to be an equal partner in whatever came next. I choose you, she whispered. When Damien kissed her, it wasn't the desperate claim of ownership it might have been months ago. It was the gentle question of a man asking permission to love her completely. She answered by kissing him back. As the sun set through the rain clouds, painting Seattle's skyline in shades of gold and rose, two people who had begun as captor and captive became something revolutionary, partners who chose each other freely. But outside the penthouse windows, a black sedan pulled away from the curb. In the passenger seat, Vincent Shaw's lawyer made a phone call. He's been arrested, but the overseas accounts are still active, the lawyer said quietly. Should we proceed with the backup plan? The voice on the other end was cold, calculating. Shaw was always expendable. But the girl, she's proven more resilient than anticipated. We'll need a different approach. The sedan disappeared into Seattle traffic, carrying with it the promise that some stories never truly end, they just pause between chapters. If you enjoyed this story, do well to like and subscribe for more billionaire romance stories like this. Also, I would love to hear your thoughts on this story. Do well to share the video to friends and family.